Hi, welcome everyone to our first webinar in our 2023 educational webinar series. This is a new format for us. In the previous years, we have had meetings every other month that are 2-hour-long meetings with a half-an-hour presentation at the start of the meeting and then connecting the dots portion at the end of the meeting. And this year, we are trialing having a meeting every month that is 1 hour, and every other month, we have connecting the dots meetings where we're having a chance to all interact with one another, learn from one another, hear from one another. And on the other months, we are having 1 hour educational webinar meetings. So we can have more than a half an hour of learning time together. And then we can also only have 1 hour of time at the screen when possible. So thank you for being here today. Our next educational webinar will be in April, and we will have Ali Tozier, who is a workplace law attorney. She'll be speaking about workplace law and lactation, and I'm really looking forward to learning from her on that day. And in June, we'll have Dr. Jessica Rosenthal speaking about human milk and the microbiome. And in August, we will have Dr. Julia Fritz and Virginia Weil from Maine Medical Center. They're a gastroenterologist and a speech and language pathologist. They'll be speaking about infant feeding challenges, and I'm looking forward to that too. And then we are open right now in October and December. If you have any topics or any speakers you know about that you would love to recommend, or if there are any topics that you really want to learn more about, we will go out and look for those speakers. Please let us know. So you can drop that in the chat, any suggestions, or you can send a message to mainebreastfeeds@gmail.com. And I'll be putting in some links into the chat box as well for you to have about the Maine State Breastfeeding Coalition. My name is Kara Kaikini. I'm the board president of the Maine State Breastfeeding Coalition. And I will be monitoring that chat during the presentation today and opening it up for questions. Well, Petrichor will open that up for questions when they're ready for that. So Petrichor has said that they would like to introduce themselves, so I am going to pass it over to you, Petrichor. And
Hi, everybody. I'm Petrichor Kneeland-Campbell, and I just wanted to say a special hi to Holly because she was my midwife for my last baby, so it's good to see her on the call. So I'm Petrichor Kneeland-Campbell. My pronouns are they, them. I am an MSBC board member and also the DEIJB committee chair for MSBC. I have been a La Leche League leader for almost 5 years now. It'll be 5 years in just a couple weeks, actually. I realized that the other day. During my time as a La Leche League leader, I helped to found the La Leche League of Maine and New Hampshire EDI committee. Currently, I am the EDI coordinator for all of La Leche League USA. So that's kind of a big job that I have. When I'm not doing my volunteer work, I run a clothing business, sewing custom clothing for people and making free binders for teens who need that sort of support. So that's really fun. I live in Bangor, the Bangor area, with my spouse and our 5 kids who we unschool. And when I'm not busy doing all of that, I sleep mainly. I read. I'm currently learning how to crochet. I just really try to take time to relax when I'm not in all those other roles. DEI has really been a passion of mine ever since I really found who I was as a person several years ago. I am trans and queer and disabled. So DEI is really important to me. I do want to take the time to thank everyone for being here. I know that these types of conversations can be difficult to hear and to have. So I really appreciate everyone taking the time out of their day today to be here. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Can everyone see that okay? I can't see the chat, so
No,
you can't see it.
no.
There, can everyone see it now?
Yeah, we can.
Can you see it as a full slideshow now?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, so jumping right in. DEIJB, what does it mean to me? Understanding the language of DEI work and how it connects to lactation. So this is really meant to be more of just a basic webinar today. So this may be completely new to some of you. You may already know some of the information, or you may even know all of it, and this may just be more of a review for you. Anywhere you are on there, it's fine. We'll definitely have more webinars that are a little bit more involved later on, but we really just wanted to start off with a basic one for everybody so that everybody's kind of on the same page. So with that in mind, the objectives for this presentation that you'll develop a basic understanding of the meaning of each letter of DEIJB. You'll understand how it relates to lactation and birth care, and you'll learn more about the MSBC DEIJB statement and where to find resources on our website. So before we really get into the presentation, I really like to start off knowing where you all are on your DEIJB journey. Are you just starting out? Do you maybe know some of the basics? Do you have lived experience as a marginalized person? Have you been on this road for a while now, but recognize that you always have more learning to do? Maybe you've made some mistakes and learned from them. So if you want to put in the chat kind of where you're coming from today, that would be helpful for me to know as I go along with my presentation. And I'll just kind of keep an eye on the chat as we go. So doing DEIJB work is not a straight linear road. It's not like you learn something and then you can move on to the next level. It's a long, curvy, windy, bumpy road. There'll definitely be times where you make mistakes, and that is totally okay. That's kind of necessary on this journey. You really need to be uncomfortable with the work in order to grow, because that uncomfortableness is what we learn and grow from when we're on a DEIJB journey. So I'm going to start off with the MSBC Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Justice, and Belonging statement. So what you see on your screen right now is actually the short version of it that we will sometimes use in materials and whatnot. It was written by the DEIJB committee when we first formed, and it can be found on our website. The long version of it is the Maine State Breastfeeding Coalition, MSBC, is committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging in our support of lactation professionals, human milk feeding families, and their communities. MSBC commits to serving all professionals, families, and their communities, inclusive of their race, ethnicity, culture, immigration status, national origin, creed, age, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, family structure, primary language, ability, religion, or socioeconomic status. We can best fulfill our mission of human milk for all babies when our historical disparities in human milk feeding through advocacy and education. MSBC embraces the full spectrum of humanity and commits to serving all professionals, families, and their diverse communities to fulfill our mission of human milk for all human babies. The DEI, so that's our whole DEIJB mission statement that we have. It was really important for us to really include more than what you just see on your screen here, which is why we have the longer statement. We also, in addition to the statement, we have a DEIJB policy for MSBC, which can also be found on our website at this site down here on the slide. And it essentially lays out guidelines for board members and the general membership, and what we expect in terms of continuing education in DEIJB. It also lays out what can be done when issues arise relating to DEIJB. So if a client maybe of one of our board members says, hey, this board member harmed me in this way, there are steps in this policy that they can take to make sure the board member gets the education that they need to make sure they're really fully fulfilling their role as a inclusive lactation professional. So I see in the chat that everyone's kind of just on the journey. Some people are just starting out. Other people have been having ongoing conversations. So we're kind of all over the place today, which is great. So most people are familiar with diversity. It's the range of human differences, including characteristics, perspectives, and experiences. So this is kind of that long list that I just read out in the DEIJB statement. You know, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, all those things that make us different as human beings. In addition to that, it's respecting and valuing those differences among humans, because we can see those differences. We can see those differences, but it's another thing to really respect and value those differences among humans. And when we're talking about diversity, we really need to remember intersectionality. So intersectionality was a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, and Kimberly is a Black woman educator. And she used it to explore the oppression of Black women and the ways they experience intersecting different forms of oppression. So it really was created by and for Black women in the beginning. So like how a Black woman might be poor, how those identities and the oppression from those identities intersect. Over time, it has expanded to include other aspects of social identity. So it recognizes that there is a connection between different forms of oppression based on different social identities that a person has, and that these experiences really can't be separated. So a Black woman, the oppression from being Black and the oppression from being a woman, those aren't separate for her, they're intertwined. You can't separate the oppression of the two of those. Or like with me being trans and queer and disabled, I can't separate out those three identities. All of the oppression from all of those intertwine and connect. We have to be careful because some white feminists have actually co-opted the term to leave out Black women from the conversation entirely, which is obviously highly problematic for many reasons, the least of which is the fact that it was created by a Black woman for Black women. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're talking about intersectionality. And you may hear some white feminists talking about it in a way that leaves out Black women, and it might be good to step up and say, well, actually, this is really what it means. Equity. So equity is recognizing that everyone has different needs and experiences and making adjustments based on that to ensure fair treatment. It's actively practicing fairness, impartiality, and justice. So it really requires understanding the root causes of disparities, and it requires looking at accessibility of services And also using respectful language that is understood by people within the context of their lives. So this is making sure everyone gets the help that they need and not just giving everyone the same thing. So it's things like making sure you're using terms that the client understands when you're talking to them. So the correct anatomical terms, they might use breast, they might use chest, they might use something else entirely. So making sure to use the terms that they understand. Or for a disabled person, every disabled person has different needs. So you really need to make sure a disabled client is getting what they need to make breast or chest feeding, human milk feeding successful. So equality does not equal equity. A lot of people have seen this graphic. It depicts two boxes. It's a baseball game, and there's three people trying to look over the fence so they can see the baseball game. And in the first box, it's demonstrating equality, where everyone is getting the same size box to stand on to see over the fence. And while it works really well for one person, it works okay for the next person and doesn't work at all for the last person. The fence is still too tall for them to see. So you can see how giving everyone the same thing really doesn't work out. In the second box, you see equity, where everyone gets the boxes that they need to be able to see over the fence. So for one person, this means one box. For the second person, this means two boxes. And for the third person, this means three boxes. Sometimes with this graphic, you'll see a third image where the fence is either destroyed or has been turned into a chain link fence to represent justice, which is really about completely breaking down the barriers entirely. So this image is the usual one. The next image, this one, is one that I like a little bit better and that I'm seeing more and more in presentations. And it depicts people riding bikes. And for equality, obviously everyone gets the same bike, even though it may not be what they need. So the wheelchair user gets a bike that they pedal with their legs, but they can't even use that bike. Or the tall person gets that same bike, but it's too short for them, and so on. And with equity, everyone gets the bike that they need, the size bike that they need in order to be able to ride a bike. And this image was developed in 2017 by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And a lot of people like it better just because it does depict different abilities. It's a little bit more diverse in its representation. The issues with this one are that it still doesn't address all the inequities, obviously. Like it doesn't account for people who can't afford a bike. It doesn't account for people who don't have a safe place to ride, or it doesn't account for people who may not even know how to ride a bike. But this image is still, I think, better than the last one. So equity is about people getting what they need to succeed. Inclusion is the intentional creation of spaces in which every individual is respected, valued, and supported. And voices of impacted communities should be prioritized, particularly marginalized groups. So this is really making sure that you are hearing everyone, valuing what they're saying, respecting what they're saying, and supporting what they're saying. And we really want to make sure that we are amplifying voices of people from marginalized groups, since they're the ones who are typically excluded from the conversation. So inclusion really requires active listening, cultural humility, and engagement with marginalized groups to create safe spaces. You can't create a safe space for a marginalized person unless you're listening to what they're saying and getting them what they need. There's little things you can do to help create a more inclusive space, like using pronouns or having a variety of families depicted in your materials or your posters that you have up in your offices, the spaces that you're in. Making sure you get continuing education that pertains to a variety of family structures and human milk feeding methods, because obviously, again, not everyone's the same and everyone needs something different. That being said, you have to remember that marginalized groups aren't a monolith. One person of the group can't speak for everyone in the group. So like, I'm a trans person, and while I like seeing people's pronouns like in their emails or when they're introducing themselves, it makes me feel a little bit more comfortable, because for me, it means that you at the very least know that pronouns are a thing. Some trans people see it as kind of a way that people are flexing their privilege. They're saying, oh yeah, I know what pronouns are, but they don't really do anything beyond that. So that's one example of, how marginalized groups aren't a monolith. You can't use one person to speak for the group, because that would be tokenism. The other thing with inclusion is that you really need to get in touch with your implicit biases, which I'll talk about a little bit later, to really help you understand where any uncomfortableness is coming from when you're talking to marginalized groups and amplifying their voices. But I will talk about both tokenism and implicit bias a little bit later on. So justice. I know a lot of people are familiar with the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Justice and the belonging, are two that are kind of newer to diversity, equity, and inclusion work. I like to think of, while DEI, you do the work, justice is really doing the work of DEIJB. A lot of organizations have DEI committees, but they're really just there to say, hey, look, we have a DEI committee. Adding justice onto it really seems to add more oomph to it, and it really makes people think that you are actually doing the work of DEI. So when we talk about justice in DEIJB work, most people refer to restorative justice. Restorative justice seeks to repair relationships by holding those who have done harm accountable to those who have been harmed. But there are some problems with the term restorative justice. It was actually created for the criminal justice system. That's where it was developed. And as we know, the criminal justice system is systemically racist. There's a lot of racial issues in our criminal justice system. And restorative justice also doesn't prioritize power dynamics when they're doing mediation. Restorative justice, it doesn't recognize the systemic issues. It really just focuses on the harm that's happening in the moment. And when it's focusing on that harm in the moment, it's not even focusing on the person who was harmed. It really centers the voice of the person who committed the violence or the harm, which is really not what we want to do when we're talking about healing from harm and violence as it relates to DEIJB. It can still have a place in DEIJB work, because obviously we want to repair harm that has been done in the moment, but we also really need to be looking at all the systemic injustices that happen. And that brings us to transformative justice. And so transformative justice seeks to respond to violence without creating more violence and or engaging in harm reduction to lessen violence. So it's really making sure that healing is happening, and when healing is happening, more harm is not occurring, which is so important when we're trying to heal from DEIJB related harm. Transformative justice was developed to exist outside the criminal justice system. It was developed by and for marginalized communities. Marginalized communities have actually been using transformative justice for a really long time to heal harms within our own communities. So it's really good because it centers the voices of marginalized folks, because we're the ones who created it. It also recognizes the systemic power imbalances and works to create spaces of healing for harmed people. So transformative justice, while yes, it does help to heal harm in the moment, it also looks at all the systemic injustices that happen and really also works to solve those problems as well. It really centers the voices of the people who have been harmed instead of the voices of the people who have been doing the harm, the oppressors. So just a quick little slide to compare the two. Restorative justice is repairing the harm of an individual's wrongdoing or an individual event and doesn't focus on the systemic injustices. And transformative justice is really addressing the origins of harm and oppression by transforming systems, structures, and institutions, while also making sure that we are healing those who have been harmed directly. Transformative justice responses and interventions don't rely on the state or government like restorative justice sometimes can. It doesn't reinforce or perpetuate violence. And it actively cultivates things that prevent violence, such as healing, accountability, and safety. So really, we can talk about both when we're talking about DEIJB, but transformative justice is kind of more of what we're trying to do, because we're trying to heal harm in the moment, but also trying to transform those systemic injustices. If you want more information on transformative justice, there's a website, transformharm.org, which I believe Kara is going to drop in the chat at some point. All right. And just a quote from Maisha T. Hill, who is a Black woman. She's the author of an awesome book called Heal Your Way Forward. I highly recommend everyone reads it. If you've read White Fragility, I really recommend you read this one as well, because this one is a million times better. It's easier to call for justice than it is to enact it, especially when enacting it would disrupt the privilege and comfort of the white worldview. So this is just something to remember when we're trying to make justice work in our world. We really need to disrupt the privilege and comfort of the white worldview to move forward. So belonging. Belonging is the outcome of diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is the feeling that everyone should have when diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice combine. A person can't feel like they belong in a group unless all other steps are being done. And when people feel welcomed and safe and trust their voices will be heard, they become full participants in the conversation. They can really be their authentic selves when the DEI and J part are being done in spaces. We can feel like what we're saying is actually being heard and being valued. We feel like we belong to the group instead of just being in the group, but still kind of being outside of the majority. So this is just a little Venn diagram I had. It doesn't have justice on it, unfortunately, but you can see here how you really need diversity, equity, and inclusion to create a sense of belonging. When you just have diversity and equity without inclusion, so just these two, that's tokenism. And it means you aren't really valuing the diverse human experiences as you should be. You might have a diverse population, but you're not really hearing their thoughts and ideas. When you have equity and inclusion without diversity, It results in not hearing diverse voices. You're just hearing the voices of the majority or of people who are like you. And it only benefits the people who are like you. When you have diversity and inclusion without equity, you might value what the diverse people are saying, but you're not giving them what they need to actually participate fully in the conversation. So you can kind of see how just having a couple of these things isn't enough. You really need to be doing all three of these to provide that sense of belonging for marginalized people. So these are a few terms that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Implicit bias is one's own biases that occur automatically and unintentionally, which affect judgments, decisions, and behaviors. So these are things that you may have picked up on when you were younger. As you get older, these are things that you might not even be aware of, belief systems that you have that you might not even be aware of, but they do affect your judgments and your decisions. So these are beliefs that you may have about, a Black person or a trans person or a disabled person that you may not even be conscious of or be aware of. Implicit bias is really where the uncomfortableness and the defensiveness comes up, that we sometimes feel in DEIJB conversations. This is really where that uncomfortableness comes from. This is why it's so important when you make a mistake to really sit back with that uncomfortableness, lean into it, and really figure out where that's coming from. Why do you have that implicit bias? What is the implicit bias that is making you feel so defensive and uncomfortable when someone calls you out on your behavior? I really recommend that everyone takes the Harvard implicit bias test. They can be found at implicit.harvard.edu. I think Kara will drop that link in the chat as well. There's a bunch of them on there. There's one for race, one for gender identity. There's a whole bunch, ability. There's a whole bunch of them on there that you can take. I recommend taking them now, and then I recommend taking them as you continue on your DEIJB journey, because you may find that your implicit biases change over time as you do more of this work and read more and learn more and grow more. Tokenism is diversity without inclusion. So it's having a diverse group of people, but not valuing all their voices, or it's just using one voice to speak for everyone. I actually had this experience in another organization I am involved in, where a board member, upon hearing that I was thinking about running for a seat at a higher level within the organization, really tried to talk me into it because she wanted me to be the token queer person for their area on the board. They thought that it would make them look good to have me. They really wanted me to be able to speak for all queer people within the organization, which is not something that I can do. People who are marginalized can speak to their own experiences, and yes, we can kind of have a general idea of what the group may want, but we really can't speak for everyone. And when we're asked to speak for everyone, you're tokenizing us. You're making us do something that isn't okay. A lot of organizations will also use someone who is Black or trans or queer or whatever as that person to say, look, we're diverse. We have this person on our board, or we have this type of person in our group. We're definitely diverse and definitely doing the inclusion thing. And that's not okay either, because you're not really listening and valuing what they have to say. Cultural humility. is the intentional self-reflection and self-critique when learning about others' lived experiences. So this is really leaning into those implicit biases and figuring out how you can overcome them, where they're coming from, really reflecting on all your beliefs and your values, and really critiquing your interactions with others. It's having that self-awareness to be able to do that. It also requires historical awareness and an understanding of one's own implicit biases, like I just said. So it's really being aware of what history has shown us. And as we know in the United States, the history that we learn in schools is not 100% correct. So it's really doing the research into what injustices have occurred historically, what systemic issues are there. And it's really making sure, again, I said this a lot and I'm going to keep saying it, it's really making sure you're listening to marginalized communities and not talking over them. That's another thing with cultural humility. Don't talk over people who have actual lived experience with what you're talking about. So this is just a little summary. I really like these questions because it sums it up nicely and also gets you to think about everything. So diversity asks, who is in the room? So who are you currently serving as a lactation professional or other type of professional? Equity asks, who is trying to get in the room but can't? What barriers are there for them? So who are you not serving? What barriers are for them? Why aren't they receiving care from you? What can you do to help them receive care? Inclusion asks, is the environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? Are you listening, understanding, and respecting individual clients' lived experiences? This one I see in lactation care especially, I see inclusion not happening a lot. I think sometimes some professionals forget that even though an issue might look similar from person to person, the solution might not be the same because of where they're coming from and what they need. Justice asks, whose safety is being sacrificed to allow others to feel comfortable? So are you taking steps to reduce and eliminate harm to marginalized clients? Are you learning about their culture? Are you using correct terms? Are you really making sure you're not harming them in the process of helping them? Belonging asks, is everyone feeling valued through positive connections and able to bring their authentic self to the table? Are you creating an environment in which clients feel safe enough to be themselves? And that one is really important. Can clients feel safe with you because you're doing the DEI and J part of this work? I also like to say that DEIJB shouldn't just be this thing that kind of sits on your shelf and you say, okay, I've done it, I'm good. This should really be a lens that you use to look through all of your work and all of your daily interactions. Are you doing these things to make marginalized people feel like they belong? So how does this all relate to lactation and birth care? So we serve and work with a diverse group of people. We should recognize that everyone's birth and lactation journey is unique to them. Everyone we help has their own unique lived experiences. We must recognize that while issues may look the same or similar between clients, so things like mastitis, latch issues, etc., not everyone has the same means, abilities, or support to solve them, and everyone needs different things to solve them. And while many lactation and birth spaces are diverse, many lack equity and inclusion, and thus justice and belonging. And this is something that I come across a lot in the lactation and birth spaces. A lot of them are very diverse, but a lot of them really don't have that equity and inclusion piece. So it's really hard to feel like you belong in lactation spaces when you're not white, cis, or heterosexual. Lack of access to equitable care results in worse outcomes. This is something we know, right? There's research on this that shows that certain populations, particularly Black women, are at a higher risk for maternal mortality because they don't get equitable care. Poor women, poor families often have worse outcomes because they don't get equitable care. So that's really a systemic thing that we really need to be aware of. There's a lack of representation in lactation texts and medical texts in general. According to research, fewer than 10% of images in medical texts show non-white skin. Fewer than 10%. So how can we treat a diverse population if we don't even know what certain conditions look like on darker skin, because that's not what we're being taught? So like mastitis, we're always taught that the skin will be red, but people who have non-white skin might not show that red skin. And they might have other signs that people who are white do not. A really good resource is the Melanated Mammary Atlas by Nikisha Killings, who is a La Leche League leader and an IBCLC. She's created this resource for IBCLCs or CLCs, lactation professionals, birth professionals. And it's all images of conditions on non-white skin. So you can really see what it looks like, so you can help a more diverse range of clients. And the demographics of our country are changing. So as you can see from this graph, over time, they're projecting that the percentage of white people in the US is going to decrease, while other populations will increase. So we're becoming a more diverse population. So this is stuff that really needs to be worked on so we can treat people effectively who don't look like us. So DEIJB, what does it mean to the MSBC DEIJB committee? So this is me. As a trans, queer, and disabled person, DEIJB is important to me because I know firsthand what it is like to be excluded from spaces, including lactation and birth spaces. I believe that DEIJB should be a lens through which we look at not only our work and volunteer environments, but a lens we should use within our daily lives as well. Without diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging, we will continue to see exclusion, harm, and inequitable health outcomes among marginalized communities. We need to ensure that all people and communities feel safe and valued so they can access the support they need and deserve. This is Jess Fairclough. She uses she, they. Parenting is hard. Breast chest feeding can be hard. MSBC should be a place where all parents can find a soft place to fall, a comforting shoulder to lean on, a safe and healthy resource. Ensuring DEIJB is a part of MSBC ensures that we are staying proactive in addressing our own biases, stigmas, and beliefs so we can offer an affirming space for all. We must keep in mind the systemic factors that affect experience of giving human milk to babies and ensure we are confronting them at every opportunity. This is Kara Kaikini. I believe that we are all human and should be treated as such. Every person deserves to be heard and treated with the same respect and fairness. More education about our historical and current systemic practices, as well as compassion for people of all characteristics, is essential to reaching goals of diversity, equity, inclusivity, justice, and belonging. This is from Hannah Lord. She's the blondish one on the left there. DEIJB is important to me so that everyone feels seen and represented in MSBC. As a CLC, I know how fresh and vulnerable the newly postpartum time is for lactating humans. At MSBC, we have a mission to hold space and empower all individual lactation experiences in our community. This is Fiona Schubeck. She uses she, her. When I induced lactation to co-feed my baby with my wife, I found very few people who knew anything about it. In a time where I needed guidance and support, I got a shrug and a thumbs up. It made me want to become a lactation consultant so I could serve the queer community. To me, DEIJB at MSBC means it's safer to find support, or it's easier to find support because providers are aware and educated. It also means there are more providers who have the lived experience of the community they serve. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice all provide a sense of belonging. It is time for belonging. If not at birth, then when? If not while nourishing your baby, then when? And this is a quote that I want to leave you with. I really like it because I've been told many times that, not in MSBC, but in other organizations, that board members need to remain neutral to both the oppressor and the oppressed. I've been told to ignore situations that affect me as a trans and a queer person. And this quote really kind of sums up why being neutral in these situations isn't okay. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. And that's from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And I just want you to sit with that as you move from this presentation. You can't just ignore problems. You can't just remain neutral. You really need to speak up and speak out. So I think there might be a tiny bit of time for questions and comments. The DEIJB resource list is a big list that our committee has put together. It's on this website here on the MSBC website. I think it's a little bit down on the site, so you might have to scroll a little bit, but there are a lot of DEIJB resources there. And if you have any questions or comments that come up throughout your DEIJB journey, not just from this presentation, you are always welcome to email me at p.kneeland-campbell@gmail.com. I am always happy to help with questions and comments and whatnot. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if anyone has any questions. Oh, Kara wrote in the chat that Nikisha is actually going to be speaking at the BEST conference in spring. So that's pretty cool. Normalizing brown breasts, a primer for breast assessment in non-white skin tones. Highly recommend it. You should go and watch it.
Thank you so much, Petrichor. I'm sure folks have some comments or questions, so I think a little bit of silence is okay here and some time for people to think about what they could ask or share either in the chat or by unmuting. You can raise your hand. I'll ask a question for everyone. I don't know if you have easy access to the reactions. You can either do a thumbs up or raise your hand, but I just want to know how many people have worried about making a mistake when it comes to this work. It's funny to do a thumbs up on that, but yeah, the hands. Yeah, there's a lot. I feel like we're all learning a lot and seeing a lot more about this, which is really, really good and really important. And thanks all for participating and with your thumbs up. And so, but I really appreciate, Petrichor, how you explain that, like, that's part of it. That's all part of, like, we have to experience those feelings in order to, that's all part of the work. And we're going to make some mistakes here and there.
And, you know, I've made mistakes. Like, everyone is like, oh, they're the EDI person to go to. I have even made mistakes. Like, I'm not a person of color. I'm white. I have made mistakes, but the point is you learn from those mistakes. You apologize in the moment and you take a step back and you really sit with any feelings that you're having from that interaction and learn and grow from that.
So Mary, I see you have your hand up. Is that a question?
Yeah, hi there. This is Mary Block. I'm just so appreciative of this conversation because I think this is, you know, our humanity. This is like what for our future. And the health of our connections, and we're a global, we're global now. And so this work is so important. I just wanted to add, I find that my 21-year-old and my 13-year-old are helping me they have a different lens with which that they see the world. And so our children, the little ones and the bigger ones, are also, able to kind of help us, because I feel like my two kids have a much broader experience. And I'm pretty sheltered. I am sheltered, and they are entering into a larger world with more folks with, all the beauty of all the colors. And they help me. And like, we were watching a TV show, and I was just asking a content question about what was going on. And I said to my daughter, what's the name of the Black dad? And my daughter immediately said, why do you have to reference it by the color of his skin? And that sparked a hour-long conversation. And, her lens is not the same as my lens. And so our children can also, I just want to throw that out there, because as parents, our children sure can help lead the way sometimes. But I'm just very appreciative, and I'm sorry I was in and out on the meeting today, but I'm going to go back and listen to the beginning. So thank you so much, Petrichor. Thank you kindly.
You're welcome. And yeah, you're definitely right. Gen Z and Gen Alpha are some pretty amazing kids, and I'm really excited to see them grow up and to see what our world becomes when they're older. Yeah. Did anyone else have any questions or comments?
I think it's important to, we think about how we live in a state that is very white, and we're not 100% white. And depending on what part of the state we're in, we might be 99.9% white, but that it's not, diversity isn't just about skin color, right? There's so many aspects to diversity. Economic diversity is definitely something that every area of our state has. And also neurodiversity. I think that's something that we're hearing a lot more about too. And I appreciate someone had enabled closed captioning on here. And I don't know, Petrichor, if that was you as co-host, but someone did. So thank you. And that's something I've been meaning to say more and set more at the beginning of meetings. And there are just so many different types of diversity to be aware of. But what kind of experiences do you all have that you are struggling with, or that you think Petrichor might be able to offer some guidance around?
I have a question that's not necessarily about that, but I feel funny asking this because I'm sure if I did a little bit of my own research, I could find some information. But Petrichor, if you have any examples of businesses or organizations who have successfully implemented some of these strategies. Speaking of neurodiversity, my brain works best if I can kind of see point A to point B and like the actual steps that were taken, and maybe how things were rough at points and how they got through it. I don't know if there's a resource like that out there, but I think that would be really helpful for me to see kind of like a concrete example of a place that really improved itself in this way. And if you don't have an example, I'm super happy to look into it, and I could share it with Kara. So just if you happen to know of something.
Yeah, so I have at least one big one. Girl Scouts of America has actually done an amazing job with DEIJB. Yeah, they've really grown as an organization, and they've really implemented a lot of practices. There's a couple state breastfeeding coalitions as well. I believe the Michigan State Breastfeeding Coalition has done a really good job, and they actually have a lot of webinars available, both just general lactation webinars, but also a lot of DEIJB related webinars. So they've done a really good job, and I'll have to look and come up with more examples, but the biggest one that comes right to my mind is Girl Scouts of America, of all organizations, really. But yeah, they've done a really good job. In the chat, Kimberly says, working in Portland, we are working with a large population of asylum seekers. 71% of our wait list are non-native English speakers. This lends a challenge with working with interpreters and supporting families when the information is not necessarily relayed well. Yeah, interpreters, yes, that is an issue. And it's actually an issue that we have in lactation care too, right? Because we often don't have interpreters at our support meetings. So how can anyone who's not English speaking really attend any support meetings that we're having? That's a big issue that we actually have with La Leche League, is interpreters and getting information to these families who really do need the support. And I think that that is a larger systemic issue where we really need more interpreters, right, who can relay this sort of information appropriately in any setting. And some of those interpreters that we need to think about are ASL interpreters. I feel like the deaf and hard of hearing population often gets left out of conversations because there's no ASL interpreters, and that's something we're actually looking into with La Leche League right now, as well as finding more ASL interpreters that could at least be at virtual meetings for support. Yes, Kara, another great resource is equalitymaine.org. I highly recommend them. They're a good resource. Another good resource specific for trans people is Maine Transnet. They have a lot of good resources and information, not necessarily on lactation care, but on helping trans people. They actually do workshops and stuff for organizations and businesses as well. So if your organization needs a trans specific workshop, like a trans 101 kind of thing, I highly recommend them for that.
I think that's who I was originally thinking of. On the Maine Transnet site, you can find a provider who is LGBTQ plus friendly. So that is really nice to know. And I'm wondering if that's a directory that lactation consultants can get on as well, or if it's just medical providers.
I think it's any provider. I would have to reach out for them to make sure, but I believe it's any provider. Lactation, I think, is lactation and birth providers are definitely ones that a lot of trans people are often seeking in Maine and are not having an easy time finding because there is no directory of trans friendly lactation and birth professionals. So I'm sure they would be happy to have specific, specialties on there.
Well, we're at 1 o'clock. Thank you so much, Petrichor, for your time putting this together and sharing your wisdom and information with us all. And thank you all for being here today and taking this step to learn more and taking this step to on this DEIBJ journey. Have a wonderful day.